It was early in the morning when the diner first started to fill up with the usual crowd. The bell above the door rang as people walked in, greeting each other with smiles, exchanging small talk, and settling into their familiar booths. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and the faces behind the counter were as much a part of the town as the town itself. It had the warmth of home, a quiet, comforting space where the smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, and the sound of clinking silverware and quiet conversation created a soothing background hum. Among the regulars was a man who wasn't quite like the others. He arrived almost every morning at the same time, took a seat by the window and ordered a simple breakfast, coffee and toast with butter. He didn't draw attention to himself, always careful to keep to the corner, his newspaper spread out in front of him as he sipped his drink. To those around him, he was just another anonymous diner patron, his wealth and status hidden behind a simple shirt and a pair of dark sunglasses. No one paid much attention to him. That was the way he liked it. Behind the counter, a young woman worked tirelessly, moving between the tables, filling coffee cups, and taking orders with a smile. Her name wasn't well known to the regulars, but that didn't matter. She was just another face in the crowd, another worker doing what she could to get by. She had a warmth to her that made people feel welcome, an easy way about her that made her popular with the customers. Her laugh was contagious, and she always had time for a quick chat with the locals as she went about her work. But lately, there was something different about her. The smile, which usually came so easily, seemed strained. Her movements were slower, more cautious. If you watched closely, you'd notice the way she favored her right arm, cradling it against her body whenever she wasn't serving food or cleaning up a table. It wasn't something she talked about, but the signs were there for anyone who was paying attention. The man who came to the diner every morning had noticed. At first it was small things, like how she seemed to struggle lifting the coffee pot with one hand or how she'd wince when reaching for a tray. But soon it became harder to ignore. Her right arm was clearly injured, and it wasn't just a simple bruise or scrape. It looked like something more serious, something that needed attention. The man wasn't sure what to do about it. He wasn't used to seeing people in pain, not in the way she was. His world was one of luxury, of private doctors and top-of-the-line care. But here in the small diner, in the midst of a busy morning, it was clear that this woman, this young waitress, was struggling, and no one seemed to notice or care. For the first few days, he tried to ignore it. He came in, ordered his usual, and watched her work. It wasn't his business, but the more he saw, the harder it became to look away. She wasn't just working with a broken arm. She was working through it, pushing through the pain, hiding it behind a mask of politeness and professionalism. She moved quickly as if to distract herself from the ache, but the strain on her face was impossible to miss. One morning, as she poured him his usual cup of coffee, their eyes met for a brief moment. Her smile was as bright as always, but there was something in her eyes, something he couldn't quite place. It wasn't just exhaustion. It was deeper, like a quiet desperation. "How's the coffee today?" she asked, her voice warm but a little too forced. "It's perfect, as always," he replied, keeping his tone light. But there was an underlying concern in his voice that he couldn't hide. She gave a quick nod, and as she turned to walk away, he noticed her wince again. This time it was more obvious. The pain was real and it was wearing her down. That was when he made up his mind. He had to know more. The man wasn't used to feeling powerless. In his world, everything could be solved with money or influence. But here in this small diner, he couldn't just write a check and make the problem go away. He didn't know how to fix what was happening, but he knew he had to try. Over the next few days, he paid close attention to her. He watched how she moved, how she interacted with the other staff and customers. She was friendly, always quick with a joke or a word of encouragement. But there was a distance in her eyes, a wall that she had built up to protect herself from the reality of her situation. He learned that her name was Jasmine, though she never mentioned it in passing conversation. She didn't talk much about herself. When he asked about her injury, she gave him a vague answer. "It's nothing," she said with a dismissive shrug. "Just a little accident." But the man could tell it was more than that. The way she avoided talking about it, the way she tried to brush it off, there was something deeper behind her words. It wasn't just an accident. She was hiding something. It was during one of those early mornings that the man decided to speak to her again. He waited until the diner was quieter, the rush of breakfast traffic dying down. He had a plan in mind, a way to get her to open up without making her feel uncomfortable. He'd seen her checking her phone a few times while waiting for orders, and on a whim he decided to take a different approach. "Do you mind if I ask you something?" he began, his tone casual. Jasmine looked at him with a raised eyebrow. "Sure, what's up?" "Have you seen a doctor about your arm?" he asked, his voice soft as if testing the waters. She stiffened slightly, and for a moment there was a flicker of emotion in her eyes. But it passed quickly, replaced by her usual friendly mask. "I'm fine," she said quickly. "Really, it's not a big deal." The man wasn't convinced. He could tell she was lying, but he didn't press. Instead, he changed the subject, casually asking about her day and her plans for the weekend. But as he left, the concern in his mind remained. For the next few mornings, he kept an eye on Jasmine. He began to notice the little things, the way she limped slightly when walking to the back of the diner, the way her movements became more sluggish as the day wore on. But still, she never asked for help, never seemed to want anyone's pity, and yet something inside him kept telling him that she needed it. She needed someone to care, to notice her struggle, to step in and offer support. He wasn't sure why, but he couldn't just let it go. Jasmine wasn't just another waitress. She was a person struggling in silence, and somehow the man felt connected to her story. He had to find a way to help her, even if she didn't want it. Over the next few days, the man found himself thinking about Jasmine more and more. Each time he walked into the diner, he looked for signs of the injury that seemed to be growing worse with each passing day. He had started to notice how her face, once so bright and full of life, now seemed tired, almost hollow. It was as if the pain from her broken arm had seeped into every part of her life, affecting more than just her physical well-being. But Jasmine never complained. She never asked for help, and she didn't seem to want anyone to know how bad things really were. She just kept working, kept smiling, kept moving through the motions as if nothing was wrong. It was almost as though she was trying to prove to the world that she was fine, even when it was obvious that she wasn't. The man couldn't stop thinking about her. He wanted to help, but he didn't know how. He had seen people struggle before, but not like this. His life had always been about having enough money to solve problems. But this wasn't a problem that could be fixed with money. Jasmine's struggle went far deeper than a broken arm. It was clear that there was something more, something that she wasn't telling him. As the days went by, he began to notice other things. Jasmine wasn't just working in pain. She was working with a sense of urgency, like she was trying to outrun something. She worked double shifts sometimes, always staying late into the night to clean up after the last customers left. The man couldn't help but wonder why she was doing this. Didn't she have a life outside of the diner? Was there something she was running from? One evening, as he sat at his usual seat by the window, he saw her in the back of the diner talking to one of the cooks. Her voice was low, but the tension in her posture was clear. She was arguing about something, but the man couldn't hear the details. When she walked back to the front, he saw the frustration in her eyes. She quickly masked it with a smile as she approached his table, but he could tell it was a mask. "Everything all right?" he asked casually, trying to keep his voice neutral. Jasmine gave him a quick smile and nodded. "Yeah, just another long day." Her eyes didn't quite meet his, and for a moment he could see the weight of whatever she was carrying in the lines of her face. "Do you ever take a break?" he asked, genuinely curious. She laughed lightly, but it didn't sound real. "Not really. This job doesn't give me much time for that." The man studied her for a moment, feeling the frustration building inside of him. He had no idea what it was like to be in her shoes, to work day after day just to make ends meet. He had always been able to afford whatever he needed. And yet here was Jasmine, strong, determined, and yet completely exhausted, fighting through every moment with a broken arm and a smile that hid her true struggles. "Do you need anything?" he asked, his voice softer now. "I can help if you need something." She froze for a moment, her hand on the edge of the table as if she was considering his words carefully, but then she smiled a little too brightly and shook her head. "I'm good. Really, I'm fine." He could tell she didn't want to talk about it. He could tell that she was pushing away the help he was offering. He respected her pride, but it hurt him to see her struggling so much and refusing help. That night, after he left the diner, he couldn't stop thinking about her. He thought about her injury, about how she had never taken a moment to rest or recover. It seemed impossible that someone could work so hard for so long with such a serious injury. But Jasmine wasn't just working for herself. She was working for her family, for the people who depended on her. The man began to look for clues, searching for answers he wasn't sure would help. He started asking around town, subtly, as if it was just casual conversation. He didn't want anyone to think he was prying, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Jasmine's story than she was letting on. One of the regulars, an older woman who came in every morning for her coffee, told him a little bit about Jasmine. The woman had lived in the town for years and knew everyone's business. "Jasmine's a good girl," she said, her voice soft but knowing. "Works hard, takes care of her kids. Her husband left her a few years ago, and she's been raising them on her own." The man listened closely. He hadn't known much about Jasmine's life outside the diner, but now things were starting to make sense. She wasn't just working to get by. She was working to support a family, to be both mother and father to her children. She didn't have the luxury of taking time off, of letting someone else take care of things. He learned that her ex-husband had left her with nothing but debt and broken promises. She had been forced to take on multiple jobs just to keep the lights on and put food on the table. The diner where she worked every morning and night was just one of her jobs. She also worked as a cleaner in the evenings, scrubbing floors in offices and cleaning houses for extra cash. All of it was exhausting, but she kept going. The man felt a deep sense of sympathy for her. He didn't know how she managed to do it all, how she kept her head above water every single day. It was clear that she was struggling, but she wasn't letting anyone see it. The walls she had built up around herself were high and solid, and she had made it clear that she didn't want help. But the man couldn't just stand by and do nothing. He had seen her at her worst, and he knew that something had to change. The next morning he arrived early at the diner, as he always did. He took his usual seat by the window, but this time his mind was elsewhere. His eyes kept drifting to the back of the diner, to the place where Jasmine always worked. She came in shortly after him, looking just as tired as she had the day before. She gave him a brief smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. As she poured his coffee, he decided to make another attempt. "I know you don't want to talk about it," he began, his voice gentle but firm, "but I can't help but notice that you're struggling. You don't have to do this alone." Jasmine froze again, her hand hovering over the coffee pot. She didn't look at him right away. Instead, she stared down at the counter, her eyes dark with emotion. "I'm fine," she finally said, her voice shaky. "You don't have to be fine," he replied, his voice softer now. "It's okay to ask for help." For a moment, there was silence between them. The weight of the words hung in the air, thick with unspoken understanding. Jasmine finally looked up at him, and for the first time in a long while, she let her guard down just a little. The mask she had been wearing cracked, and the vulnerability in her eyes was clear. But before she could say anything more, the bell above the door rang, signaling the arrival of more customers. She quickly stepped back, her usual mask of professionalism sliding back into place. "I'll get your breakfast," she said, her voice quiet but steady. The man watched her as she walked away, knowing that the conversation wasn't over. He hadn't gotten through to her yet, but something had shifted. She had heard him, even if she wasn't ready to accept his help. It was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. As the morning rush continued, the man sat in silence, sipping his coffee. His mind was spinning with thoughts of how to reach her, how to show her that she didn't have to carry this burden alone. But for now, he had to wait. He knew that Jasmine wasn't going to open up easily. She had built a wall around herself, and it was going to take time to break it down, but he was willing to try. He just needed to find the right way to get through to her. The days passed slowly after that conversation, and the man found himself growing more and more concerned about Jasmine. She had kept her distance from him since their last exchange, but he noticed that something had changed. She no longer gave him that bright, automatic smile that she used to wear like a mask. Instead, her smile seemed forced and her eyes were tired, as if the weight of the world was bearing down on her. He couldn't shake the image of her moving through the diner, struggling with her injury and her responsibilities. He had learned enough about her life to know that she was doing everything she could to make sure her kids were taken care of. Yet it seemed that she was constantly running on empty, pushing herself beyond what anyone should have to endure. The man had grown used to living in a world where money could fix just about anything. If something went wrong, he just threw money at the problem until it went away. But Jasmine's problems weren't something that money could easily solve. She was a single mother, and her struggles weren't just about paying bills or getting medical care. They were about the emotional weight of doing everything alone, of trying to keep everything afloat while holding on to the fragile hope that one day things might get easier. One evening, after a particularly long day, the man decided to do something. He couldn't just sit by and watch her continue to struggle. He had been thinking about her situation for weeks now, and it was clear to him that Jasmine wasn't going to ask for help. She didn't want to appear weak or helpless. She was proud, fiercely independent, and she would never let anyone see how much she was hurting. But the man knew that sometimes people needed help, whether they asked for it or not. And he was determined to be there for her, even if it meant stepping into a role that was unfamiliar to him. The next morning, as the diner started to fill with its usual crowd, the man sat at his usual spot by the window. He had been coming in every day for weeks now, always at the same time, and he had started to notice a pattern in Jasmine's behavior. She was always tired, always on edge, always trying to push through the pain, but today there was something different. She wasn't moving as quickly as usual. She was slower, more deliberate in her actions, and her face looked pale. When she approached his table, he could see that she was trying to keep her expression neutral, but it was obvious that something was off. "Are you okay?" he asked before she could even take his order. His voice was soft, concerned. Jasmine blinked as if surprised that he'd asked. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "I'm fine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but even as she spoke the words, the man could see the lie in her eyes. "You don't look fine," he said gently, setting his coffee cup down. "You've been pushing yourself too hard." Jasmine looked away, her eyes flicking nervously toward the kitchen. "I'm fine," she repeated more firmly this time. But there was an edge to her voice now, as if she was trying to convince herself more than him. The man studied her for a moment. He could tell she wasn't going to open up easily, but he wasn't about to give up. He'd come too far to let her push him away again. "I've been coming here for a while now, and I've noticed you've been struggling," he said quietly. "I know you don't want to talk about it, but I can't just sit here and watch you keep hurting yourself." Jasmine's eyes darted back to him, and for a moment, he saw a flicker of something in her gaze. Maybe it was surprise, maybe it was gratitude, but whatever it was quickly masked by the wall she had built around herself. "I don't need anyone's pity," she said, her tone sharper than before. "I'm doing just fine on my own." The man could feel the tension building between them, but he refused to back down. He knew she was scared. Scared of being vulnerable. Scared of letting anyone in. He knew because he had been there himself once upon a time, when the idea of asking for help felt like a failure. But he also knew that everyone had their limits, and Jasmine had reached hers. "I'm not pitying you," he said calmly. "I'm just offering help. You don't have to do this by yourself." She stood there for a moment, her expression unreadable. The man could see the conflict in her eyes, the part of her that wanted to open up, to let someone help, and the part that was terrified of letting anyone see her weakness. "I don't need help," she said again, her voice quieter now. "I'll be fine. I always am." The man didn't know what else to say. He had tried, but he knew that Jasmine wasn't ready to accept help yet. And he understood that. He had to respect her boundaries, even if it meant stepping back for a while. "I'm here when you're ready," he said softly. He didn't push her further, didn't try to convince her of anything she wasn't ready to hear. But he meant what he said. He wasn't going to give up on her. As the morning passed, the man sat quietly watching her as she worked. He could see the strain in her movements, the way she favored her injured arm. But he also saw her strength, her resilience. It was that strength that had kept her going. All this time, even when the world seemed like it was against her. The diner was busier than usual that day, with more customers coming in and out, and Jasmine seemed to be moving faster than ever. The man watched her closely, noting how she would wince occasionally as she carried trays or cleaned tables. Her movements were becoming more sluggish, and he could tell she was reaching her breaking point. As the lunch rush came to an end, Jasmine finally took a break. She disappeared into the back of the diner for a few minutes, and the man saw his chance. He walked up to the counter where the diner's owner, a middle-aged man named Carl, was preparing some orders. "Carl," the man said, his voice low but steady. "How long has Jasmine been working here?" Carl looked up, his brow furrowing slightly. "Oh, she's been with us for a few years now. Hard worker, that one. Doesn't complain, always picks up the slack. She's one of the best we've got." The man nodded thoughtfully. "Has she been here long hours lately? Seems like she's pushing herself pretty hard." Carl shrugged. "She always works hard, but lately, I've noticed she's been staying later than usual. Never complains, though. But I can tell she's tired. You can see it in her eyes." The man felt a pang of guilt. He had been so focused on Jasmine's injury that he had forgotten to consider the toll the job was taking on her. She wasn't just dealing with a broken arm. She was dealing with exhaustion, with the pressure of providing for her children, with the weight of everything on her shoulders. "I just want to make sure she's okay," the man said, his voice low. Carl gave him a knowing look. "I'm sure she'll be fine, she's tough, but I'll tell you, she's not one to ask for help, not from anyone." The man nodded, understanding. He had already figured that out. Jasmine wasn't the kind of person who would ever ask for help. And maybe that was part of the problem. She felt like she had to do it all on her own. The man left the diner that day with a heavy heart. He had tried to reach out to Jasmine again, but she had pushed him away. And while he understood why she did it, it didn't make it any easier. He couldn't stop thinking about her, about the way she had been carrying this burden for so long without anyone to help her. He had to figure out a way to show her that she didn't have to do everything alone. But he also knew that he couldn't force her to accept help. He had to wait for her to be ready, to trust him enough to let him in. For now, all he could do was keep showing up, keep offering his support, and hope that one day, Jasmine would let him help her, before it was too late. This section of the story is designed to build the tension, showing the man's growing concern and the complexities of Jasmine's situation. It sets up the emotional stakes and leaves room for the next steps in the narrative. Let me know if you need any adjustments. Days passed, and the routine of the diner seemed to continue without change. The man arrived every morning, sitting at his usual spot by the window, silently watching Jasmine as she worked. He saw the way her shoulders drooped with exhaustion, the way she tried to hide the pain in her arm, and the way she forced herself to keep smiling for the customers. He could tell she was reaching her breaking point, but she never once asked for help. He had tried everything he could think of, gentle conversations, offering help, and even talking to Carl about her situation. But Jasmine remained closed off, unwilling to let anyone in. The man understood her pride. He knew that asking for help wasn't easy for someone like her. But at the same time, he couldn't help but feel that she was pushing herself too far, and he feared that if she didn't slow down, she might break. One day, after a particularly busy morning, Jasmine disappeared into the back of the diner. The man could see her through the small window in the door, watching her rub her neck in an attempt to ease the tension. He could tell she was in pain, but there was nothing he could do about it. Or at least that's what he thought. It was then that he noticed something else. As he sat there, lost in thought, he saw one of the other servers, a younger woman, walk over to Jasmine in the back. They exchanged a few words, and then the younger woman hugged Jasmine tightly. The man couldn't hear their conversation, but he could see the way Jasmine's body stiffened at first, as though she wasn't used to being hugged. But then, she seemed to relax, even for just a moment, and the two women stayed close for a while. He sat there wondering what was going on. Who was this other woman, and why had she come to comfort Jasmine? He had never seen anyone offer her such kindness before, and it made him feel a strange mix of hope and frustration. Jasmine needed someone in her life who could offer her support, but she didn't seem to realize that she didn't have to go through everything alone. When the women finally pulled apart, Jasmine's face was still tired, but there was something different about her now. It was as if, for the first time in a long while, she had allowed herself to be cared for. The man couldn't help but feel a little bit of relief. Maybe, just maybe, there were people in her life who were able to see past her walls even if she wouldn't let him in. The younger woman smiled at Jasmine one last time before walking back to her section of the diner. Jasmine, still looking, a little shaken but also more at ease, walked back to the counter, ready to face another wave of customers. It was in that moment that the man made up his mind. He had been waiting for her to come to him, to ask for help, but he realized that wasn't going to happen. Jasmine wasn't the type of person who would admit she needed assistance, not even to someone who cared. But maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to help her without her having to ask. The next morning when he arrived at the diner, he came with a plan. He wasn't going to wait for Jasmine to open up on her own. Instead, he was going to show her that there were people who cared, whether she wanted them to or not. He had learned a lot about her in the past few weeks, but now it was time to take action. As he sat down at his usual seat, he saw her walk through the door, looking as tired as ever. Her movements were slower today, more deliberate, and the man couldn't help but feel a wave of concern. She had been pushing herself too hard, and it was only a matter of time before she collapsed from exhaustion. He couldn't stand to see her continue down this path. When Jasmine approached his table, her eyes met his for a brief moment before she quickly looked away, clearly trying to avoid any further conversation. He could tell she was still trying to maintain her distance. "Good morning," she said in a neutral tone, her voice barely above a whisper. "Morning," he replied, his voice soft. "How are you feeling today?" She hesitated before answering. "I'm fine," she said as if she was trying to convince herself. "Just another day." He watched her for a moment, taking in the exhaustion that was written all over her face. He could see the way she was trying to hide it, but it was obvious that she was struggling. He couldn't let her go on like this anymore. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice calm but firm. "You don't have to keep going like this. You don't have to do it all on your own." Jasmine's eyes flicked up to his, and for the first time, he saw something there. A crack in her armor, but it was gone almost as quickly as it appeared. "I'm fine," she said again, more forcefully this time. The man knew she wasn't going to open up easily, but that didn't stop him. He had to make her understand that there was no shame in asking for help, that it wasn't a sign of weakness but a sign of strength. "I don't think you are," he said softly. "I've been watching you, Jasmine. You're breaking yourself trying to carry everything alone. You've been doing it for so long, and I can see it's taking a toll on you." Her expression hardened, and she stepped back slightly. "I don't need anyone's help," she said, her voice shaky but firm. "I've been doing just fine." The man could feel the tension building between them. She was so determined to keep up the facade that everything was fine, but it was clear to him that it wasn't. He wanted to reach out to show her that she didn't have to do this alone, but he knew she wasn't ready to hear that yet. "You don't have to keep pretending," he said quietly. "You don't have to carry it all by yourself." Jasmine's eyes filled with something he couldn't quite name. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was frustration, but it was unmistakable. She took a deep breath, clearly struggling to keep her emotions in check. "I don't want to burden anyone," she said finally, her voice soft. "I've been on my own for so long. I don't know how to ask for help." The man's heart softened. He knew what it felt like to carry the weight of the world alone. He knew what it was like to feel like you had to do everything on your own, because asking for help felt like admitting failure. But that wasn't true. Asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness, it was a sign of courage. "You don't have to do everything alone," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You have people who care about you, people who want to help." For a long moment, Jasmine said nothing. She just stood there, her hand resting on the counter as she looked at him, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite decipher. Then, finally, she spoke. "I'm scared," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared that if I ask for help, I'll lose control. I'm scared that if I let people in, they'll see how weak I really am." The man's heart broke for her. He could see the fear in her eyes, the vulnerability she had been hiding for so long. He didn't know exactly what had happened to her in the past, but he could feel the weight of her fears pressing down on her. "You're not weak, Jasmine," he said softly. "You're strong, but even the strongest people need help sometimes, and it's okay to ask for it." Jasmine's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time she didn't try to hide them. She let the tears fall quietly and without shame. The man didn't say anything. He just sat there watching her, knowing that this was the moment she had needed all along, the moment when she could finally let down her guard and accept that it was okay to be vulnerable. After a few minutes, Jasmine took a deep breath and wiped her eyes, looking at the man with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. "I don't know how to do this," she said softly. "You don't have to know how," he replied. "You just have to take the first step. Let people help you. Let me help you." For the first time in what felt like forever, Jasmine seemed to relax. She took a deep breath as if she was finally allowing herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. "I'll think about it," she said quietly. And that was enough. The man knew that it would take time, but he also knew that Jasmine had finally taken the first step toward letting go of the burden she had been carrying for so long. He wasn't going to push her any further. He would give her the space she needed, but he wouldn't give up on her. Not now. Not ever. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was a road they would walk together, one step at a time. The days that followed were a mix of small changes and quiet breakthroughs. Jasmine hadn't fully let her guard down, but something had shifted inside of her. For the first time in a long time, she was beginning to believe that she didn't have to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders alone. The man could see it in her eyes. The hesitance was still there, but the walls she had built were starting to crack. Each morning, when he arrived at the diner, he found her in a slightly different state. The tiredness was still there, but it wasn't as overwhelming. She had begun to take small breaks during her shifts, resting when she could, even if it was just for a few minutes. It wasn't much, but it was progress. He noticed the way she would linger near the counter, talking to the other workers, laughing a little more freely. And while he could see that she was still holding herself back, he also saw moments of hope. Jasmine was slowly starting to trust again, even if she didn't fully realize it. One morning, as the sun's light filtered through the diner windows, Jasmine walked over to the man's usual table with a hesitant smile. She placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of him, her fingers brushing the cup a little more gently than usual. "How's the coffee today?" she asked, her voice a bit softer than the usual routine. "It's perfect," the man replied, smiling back at her. There was a quiet warmth in his words, a reassurance he wasn't sure she even needed to hear but said anyway. She stood there for a moment longer, hesitating as if there was something she wanted to say but wasn't sure how to express it. I wanted to say thank you," she finally said, her voice low but steady. "For everything. For not giving up on me." The man met her gaze, his heart swelling with a quiet sense of pride. He had seen so many people come and go in his life, but Jasmine was different. She had taught him more than he could have ever anticipated. He didn't need a thank you. Seeing her begin to open up was more than enough. "You don't have to thank me," he replied gently. "I didn't do anything. You're the one who decided to take the first step." Jasmine nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It wasn't easy," she admitted, her eyes flickering with a mix of emotions. "I've always been used to doing things on my own. I didn't know how to let anyone in." The man nodded, understanding more than she knew. "Sometimes we think we can handle everything ourselves," he said softly. "But no one is meant to carry the load alone." Jasmine smiled, a little unsure but with a spark of gratitude in her eyes. "I know that now. It's just hard to trust. It's hard to admit that I need help." "I get it," the man said. "But trusting people doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're strong enough to admit you can't do it all on your own." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, there was a quiet understanding. Jasmine seemed to absorb them, her shoulders relaxing just slightly. "Thank you," she said again, her voice softer this time, as if the words were finally starting to carry the weight of everything she had been holding in. As the morning rush of customers continued, the man sat back, watching her move around the diner. He noticed that she wasn't rushing as much as before. She still worked hard, still took care of the customers with the same warmth and kindness, but there was a difference in the way she carried herself now. She wasn't doing it all with a facade anymore. She was allowing herself to take moments of rest, allowing herself to feel supported, and it showed. It was clear to him that Jasmine wasn't completely healed. No one could be after years of carrying so much alone. But she had started to change. Slowly, little by little, she was learning to lean on others when she needed to. As the weeks went by, the man continued to visit the diner, always with a quiet sense of care and respect for Jasmine's space. He could see the gradual changes in her, how she was more open with the people around her, how she had started to laugh a little more, how the exhaustion seemed to lift just a little bit each day. One afternoon, the man sat at his usual table watching as Jasmine spoke with a young boy at one of the booths. She was speaking to him with a soft voice, her usual smile now genuine and kind, not the strained version she had worn before. The man couldn't hear what they were talking about, but he could tell from the way the boy responded that she was showing him the same kindness she had always shown everyone else. It was in moments like this that the man realized just how much she had to offer the world. She had spent so many years believing she had nothing to give, but in truth her strength, her kindness, her warmth, they were the things that had kept everything together, even when it seemed like everything was falling apart. And then one day something unexpected happened. Jasmine walked up to his table with a small, hesitant smile on her face. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice softer than usual. I want to try something new. I want to make a change." The man looked up, his brow furrowing with curiosity. "What do you mean?" "I've been working here for so long, but I think it's time for me to focus on something else," she said, her voice still unsure but determined. "I want to take a class. I want to learn something new, something I've always wanted to do. I'm not sure exactly where it'll take me, but I feel like I need to try." The man felt a surge of pride for her, his heart warming at the words. He had always known that Jasmine was capable of more than she realized, and now she was finally beginning to believe it too. "That's amazing," he said, his voice full of encouragement. "I'm so proud of you." Jasmine's smile widened just a little. "I never thought I'd have the courage to do something like this, but I think it's time. I can't keep living in the same place forever." For the first time in a long while, the man saw hope in her eyes. It wasn't the kind of hope that was naive or unrealistic, but the kind that came from taking small steps toward a brighter future. The kind of hope that came from believing, even just a little, that things could be different. The next few weeks were filled with new beginnings. Jasmine enrolled in a local community college, taking night classes in business management. It wasn't easy, and there were days when she was tired from balancing work and school, but she kept pushing forward. And every step of the way, the man was there for her, offering support when she needed it, but never pushing too hard. As she made progress, Jasmine's confidence grew. She started to believe in herself in ways she hadn't for years. And with each passing day, she moved further away from the burden she had been carrying for so long. She still had a long way to go, but for the first time, she felt like she was heading in the right direction. And through it all, the man remained a quiet, steady presence in her life. He was never there to take the spotlight, never there to take credit for her success. He simply wanted to see her flourish. He had never expected this journey to turn into something more, but he couldn't help but feel that they had both learned something valuable along the way. That night, as he sat in the diner, watching Jasmine interact with a table of customers, he felt a sense of peace. She was no longer the woman who carried the weight of the world on her own. She had learned to trust, to open up, to ask for help when she needed it. And most importantly, she had learned that she didn't have to face everything alone. It had been a long road, but Jasmine was no longer the woman she had been when he first met her. She had found her strength, not in the absence of weakness, but in the courage to ask for help and the willingness to accept it. And as for the man, he realized that helping someone else had changed him too. He had always thought he was the one offering help, but in truth, Jasmine had given him just as much, if not more, than he had ever given her. As the diner settled into the quiet of the evening, the man looked out the window, a quiet smile on his face. Sometimes the greatest changes come from the simplest acts of kindness. And he had learned that helping someone else wasn't just about giving, it was about being there, step by step, through the hard times and the good. And for the first time, he truly believed that everything would be okay.